Hello, everyone. You're listening to the Fantasy Football Uptick. I'm Jeremiah Blue, and today we're going to be talking about the New York Jets, the team that I think is going to finish second in the AFC East this year. When talking about the New York Jets, I actually think they're a little bit underrated. So when I look at fantasy outlook of what I think is going to happen to a certain team throughout the season, the thing that I like to focus on first is the coaching and the offensive line. So has there been a coaching change, and has the offensive line made a different, like, is it moving pieces? Is it for better or is it for worse? I think that's something that gets overlooked when people are talking about fantasy football implications on certain players, right? So when we look at the New York Jets, Todd Bowles is still the coach, but he's more of a defensive-minded guy. So the offensive coordinator, John Mortensen, got fired last year by Bowles for abandoning the run too often. So they bring in Jeremy Bates, and I think basically he's going to bring in a similar system. It's still going to be a West Coast offense, but you would imagine that he's going to commit to the run just a little bit more based on the fact that that's why John Morton got fired, right? Apologize for the airplane flying over our head right now. But so Wesley Johnson was the center last year, and he was basically the worst player on the offensive line. He was replaced by Spencer Long from the Redskins. I don't think that's a great improvement, but it is a little bit of an improvement to a team that finished who had 47 sacks last year, which was the seventh worst sack ratio in the NFL, and they were the 20th in yards per carry. So we're talking about a pretty bad offensive line that's basically returning everyone with the exception of the center. So I'm not expecting big things from the offensive line. I think that's going to be the thing that's keeping them from making that wild card spot that they could possibly do, being that I believe that they're still the second best team in the division now. The Bills made the playoffs last year. They were the second best team last year. The news about LaShawn McCoy, which I'm not going to touch on because I actually don't know all the details. It could be real, it could be fake. So I'm not going to jump on either. I'm going to let the process kind of play itself out before I say anything about LaShawn McCoy. But that just makes me feel better because I had already picked the Jets to be a better football team than the Buffalo Bills going into this season. So let's go back to the fantasy players that we care about, right? So quarterback, Josh McCown wasn't actually that bad last year. He was 5-7 record with the Jets, and I think the Jets have actually improved since last season. And without Josh McCown, they were basically 0-3, and then he started and didn't finish a game, which they also lost that game as well. So I'm not saying that Josh McCown is going to be the quarterback all year long, but I think the team around the Jets, the defense is good enough. They struggle with the pass rush. So this is not a team that I'm overly excited about, but they do have a good defensive coach. Bowles is a very good coach, and they have a very young, talented roster. If they can find a way to get to the quarterback, get a pass rush in there, I think that this could be a really good team that could possibly fight for a wild card, because I actually expect Sam Darnold to take over at least by week 8 and really have a big effect. And I think for me, he was the best quarterback in this draft. I know they drafted Baker Mayfield. I just think Sam Darnold, with everything I've heard, what I've seen on tape, the things that they have to fix with him are little things where I think they're very fixable. To me, he's very similar to Jameis Winston. If you look at his numbers as far as completion percentage, yards, just his style of play, it seemed like he seems very much like Jameis Winston's, across the board. The difference is he seems more coachable. He seems like he likes football more. Everything you hear about the kid is basically that he's really into the sport. Like, he eats, sleeps, and breathes football. They're talking about his 21 birthday party, and where he didn't even go out to get a drink. He was just going and watch some film or something like that. So this guy really loves football. So I like the idea if he's uber talented and he's into it. And I think Josh McCown is a great quarterback to learn from. You're going to hear a lot of things about Teddy Bridgewater through the offseason. I think it's all smoke and mirrors. What they're trying to do is they're trying to convince other teams that Teddy Bridgewater is worth trading for. Josh McCown is basically guaranteed $10 million, and you have to pay him that money whether he's on the team or not, off the team. You save no money cutting Josh McCown, whereas Teddy Bridgewater's getting significantly less. If they can show him out in preseason and maybe get a deal where they can maybe bring in a pass rusher for Teddy Bridgewater, that's basically what they're going to do. And Josh McCown's going to start the year, or Sam Darnold's going to start the year. It's going to be one of those two. Teddy Bridgewater would have to really blow McCown out of the water for him to get a shot to start the year. I think basically they're just talking him up so that they can trade him in the at some point in the preseason. All right, so running back, we talked about the offensive line not being that great. Isaiah Crowell was the big signing there at running back. It's basically going to be Crowell or Bilal Powel. They signed a couple of other guys, but I think it's really going to come down to one of those two guys. Bilal Powel is one of those guys that doesn't kind of go away. Like he kind of comes in and he's the receiving back. But for my money, I'm going to go Crowell. People forget how good he was just a year before last year. And a lot of the issues that he had last season came from game flow. I mean, he was on the Cleveland Browns that didn't win a single game. They only won one game in the last 2 years. They were playing from behind a lot. And they just happen to have a guy like Duke Johnson, who's one of the more elite running backs as far as like passing down backs, scat backs. So, game flow kind of got Isaiah Crowell out of the game. So he wasn't able to kind of show what he's capable of. But when it comes to running the football, him versus Bilal Powel, if you watch him on tape, Isaiah Crowell is just much more explosive. And he's actually not a bad pass catcher. He just happened to be on a team with a great pass catcher at running back with Duke Johnson. Now, I'm not saying Bilal Powell is going to completely leave the offense. A lot said about like his, Bilal Powell has throughout his career averaged a pretty good yards per carry. But a lot of that's kind of tricky. So last year, if you watch Bilal Powell, he had this 175-yard run against the Jaguars. It was really like a 3-yard run. Then one of his own men tackled him. He got up. Nobody from the Jaguars had touched him, but everybody in the Jaguars stopped playing. He ends up getting a 75-yard run. If you take away that oddball play, where you end up is basically his 4.3 average goes to a 3.9 average. So it's not really that great now, and a lot of that has to do with offensive line. Honestly, yards per carry, typically offensive line plays a major role in that. But in this situation, I think Isaiah Crowell is going to be the featured back there. And like I was talking to you earlier, John Morton actually got fired based on the fact that he abandoned the run. So the one thing the Jets are probably not going to do, or Jeremy Bates is not going to do this year, is abandon the run early. And with a rookie quarterback and an old quarterback, whoever's starting, you're not going to want to put them throwing the ball 35, 40 times a game. You're going to try and you're trying to take the air out of the ball, rely on that defense. Bowles is a defensive coach. I think he believes in that defense, and it's a young defense. So if they can get a pass rusher to come kind of out of nowhere, and that happens throughout times in the NFL, a way that they can scheme a way to get at the quarterback, I think this defense could keep them in games. And this is going to be they're going to rely a lot on Isaiah Crowell. Now, the other thing is, when I first kind of thought about it, I was like, the Jets, their receivers, I mean, they don't have any good receivers, right? But when I started to actually research it, they're the only team in the league with 4 players who have had 800-yard seasons, right? So you got Robbie Anderson, who was pretty good last year. He's had some off the field issues, but delving a little bit further into it, it was really only reckless driving. So if anything, he's either going to get fined or suspended for 1 game. So he's a guy that I kind of like. As far as, and when it comes to these Jets receivers, this is more talking towards the quarterback, especially like a guy like Sam Darnold in your dynasty leagues. Like, he's actually got some weapons here, because Robbie Anderson is probably the only receiver I'm going to draft out of this group. And the reason for that is because he's the speed guy. He's the guy who's taking the top off the defense. His role is established. Whereas you got Jeremy Curse and Enunwa, they're both kind of like possession receivers. So, I mean, they're going to eat from each other's target share. And then you got Terrell Pryor, who we saw what he was 2 years ago, and that it showed he's got a lot of talent. But then this year, or then last year, he really got exposed. And I think a lot of that comes from there being film out on Terrell Pryor. Now, granted, a lot of it had to do with injuries, but there was some film out on Terrell Pryor all of a sudden, and now corners he's still young and developing into a receiver. Remember, he played quarterback for most of his career. So really, that's it for the New York Jets as far as I go. I'm not drafting the tight end. Like I said, I might stream the defense if somehow they by matchups, because I do kind of like their offense as far as taking the ball. But the fact that they don't get any pass rush, you're not going to get those sacks. So again, it's not something that I'm not going to draft them. But yeah. So thank you for listening to the Fantasy Football Uptick. If you liked our show, hit subscribe, hit like, and see ya.